So hi there, everybody. I'm Laura Brandis, and I'm the Communications Director at the POLIS Water Sustainability Project at the University of Victoria. I want to welcome all of you to today's webinar, which is the first webinar in our third season of the Creating a Blue Dialogue series. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those veterans in the crowd, I want to welcome you back. We're looking forward to another really fantastic season with some interesting guests. To kick off our season, today you'll be getting a sneak preview of a new report on the WaterEnergy Nexus in BC that we is POLIS and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, are expecting to release in the coming weeks. And we also have Steve Weissman on the line, bringing his perspectives from the Centre for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Berkeley University. By exploring issues as well as on-the-ground case studies where water and energy use and production are inextricably linked, our speakers today will start to explore what the water-energy nexus might mean for policy, governance, and economic development. Now, before we get into the presentations, I do want to take a quick moment to thank all of our webinar partners and sponsors. For the entire series this year, I want to give a shout out to the Canadian Water Network, Water Canada Magazine, as well as the Centre for Global Studies, which is where the POLIS project is housed at UVic. For this specific webinar, I want to say thank you to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, as well as Berkeley Law. And thank you to our funders as well, the University of Victoria, the Moore Foundation, and the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation. So for those of you who have joined us before, you'll know that there are a few housekeeping items that I like to take care of before we start. The first thing is audio. For those of you who have been with us before, you'll notice that we have a little bit of a different audio setup this year. You can listen either through your computer speakers or through the telephone, so I'm really glad to hear that it's working. I have put a blanket mute on everybody in the room, and the reason for that is to reduce any audio interference or feedback. So the question period, which is going to take place at the end of the two presentations today, will take place via the chat box. You can type in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen any questions that come to mind. I'll serve as moderator, reading those out to our three panelists who we have on the line with us today. And so that you can give that chat box a little bit of a try, I'd like to invite you now to introduce yourselves, to get a sense of the community that we have here in the webinar room today. Maybe just let us know who you are, what organization you're with, and also if you have more than one person listening on your end, just let us know how many people are in the room with you. Now, as you start to introduce yourselves and we get a nice sense of who your colleagues are in this virtual space today, I'm going to start to introduce our speakers. So the first presentation today is going to be presented in tandem by Jesse Baltutis and Ben Parfitt. Jesse is my colleague here at the POLIS Water Project, where he works as a researcher on water policy and governance issues. One of his areas of focus is the relationship between water and energy use in BC, and he is a contributing author to the forthcoming report that I mentioned earlier, along with our next speaker, Ben Parfitt. Ben is a longtime researcher and writer who specializes in natural resource management. He's the lead author of the forthcoming WaterEnergy Nexus report, and he is a resource policy analyst with the BC office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And as well, Ben is a research associate here at the POLIS Water Project. And I'm also thrilled to welcome Steve Weissman, who, as I mentioned earlier, teaches energy law at the Centre for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Berkeley Law. He directs the energy program there, and he also oversees the City Streets program. In addition, Steve teaches at both Vermont Law School and Lewis and Clark, and he also has substantial experience as a policy advisor and legal director, having worked for the California Public Utilities Commission, the California State Assembly's Committee on Natural Resources, and the Local Government Commission. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Ben and Jesse to take it away. So Jesse, if you don't mind hitting *6 on your phone, that should bring your voices on the line.
Oh, we're good. Thank you so much, Laura, for organizing today's webinar and for all your organization and skills brought to the previous webinars in previous years. So welcome, everyone. Jesse and I are going to be walking you through, as Laura said, some of the work that we've been doing leading up to a publication of a new report on the WaterEnergy Nexus, which should be out in the next month. So I should begin by saying or reiterating that this is a joint research initiative being undertaken by the POLIS Project on Ecological Governance, and in particular its water program, and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And this is envisioned as the first in a series of research efforts that will be looking at the WaterEnergy Nexus in the province. So I want to begin briefly today by saying what is driving our interest in this subject. We often tend to think about water resources and energy resources as separate entities, but in fact they are intimately connected, and because of their interconnectedness and vulnerability to climate change, we want to safeguard those resources as best we can. As this slide illustrates, water is a critical source of energy. The most obvious example of which is the water impounded by a hydroelectric dam. But the energy created by the water that is diverted through turbines at a hydroelectric dam also provides numerous water services. We use energy to pump water, we use energy to heat water, we use energy to treat water, and we do all of this again and more with wastewater. Climate change can affect both the timing and the duration of water flows, as well as water temperatures. And all of these hydrological changes can impact energy production. So it's very, very important to see the intimate connections between our water and our energy resources. There are three good reasons why we need to be concerned about the WaterEnergy Nexus in the province at this point in time. The first relates to our primary power source, hydroelectricity. Electricity statistics tell us that in the first 20 of the past 30 years, there was only 1 year in which British Columbia was a net importer of electricity. But in the past decade, on average, once every 2 years, the province has been in an energy trade deficit. This suggests that domestic power production from BC's hydroelectric sources is beginning to be stretched. The second concern relates to climate change. In 2010 and again in 2012, we witnessed significant periods of drought in northeast British Columbia, where, significantly, much of our hydroelectric power is derived, and where major expansions in natural gas industry activities could have profound impacts on water and hydroelectric resources. Third, the cumulative effects of multiple land uses in watersheds is becoming more and more of an issue for both local communities and for provincial regulators. These three challenges highlight what we face ahead and the need for improved governance of our linked water and energy resources. And now Jesse will talk a bit about the approach we took to doing this report.
Thanks, Ben. So when Ben and I were researching for this report, we really cast a wide net to look at the problems and solutions that can be gleaned from, a tour around the province. So we looked at nearly 20 case studies in different regions of the province, which highlight the challenges and concerns we talk about in the report. These case studies help to inform the actions Ben and I will discuss later in the presentation, and which we believe would address the central challenge of governance reform of our interlinked water and energy resources in BC. Now Ben's going to talk a little bit about the goals that we set for ourselves and what the overarching conclusions we reached in this work are.
Thanks, Jesse. We wanted to gain a better understanding of where the emerging challenges were, and what we found were numerous instances where stresses and strains were occurring with water and energy resources. This included municipalities that were potentially having to provide more water and more energy-intensive water treatment to their water users in future years, with potentially significant ramp-ups as well in water and energy-intensive resource industry activities. We also wanted to canvass the province for examples of regions where proactive approaches were being taken to conserve water and energy resources. And we found good examples of that, including efforts underway by the Okanagan Basin Water Board and entities like the Southeast Kelowna Irrigation District. Our conclusion is that when the challenges are considered in their entirety, there is a clear need for increased attention to be paid to how water and energy resources are managed. This includes the need for the provincial government to ensure consistency across its water, clean energy, climate change, and economic diversification policies, so that the pursuit of one policy objective does not undermine the other. Changes to governance structures are something that the provincial government itself has acknowledged is needed through its Water Act modernization process. But changes to governance and governance structures, as we all know, will take time. So we have concluded that in the meantime, there are 4 things that can be done fairly quickly that will set the foundation for a more effective governance in future years. Before turning to those 4 action items, we want to sketch out a few things that we saw on our travels. So Jesse will now talk first about some of the inspiring and not so inspiring things that we found.
So we've broken these up roughly into the good, the bad, and the ugly. So on the good side, in BC, we're beginning to see signs that municipalities are getting serious about the need to encourage greater conservation of water resources. So the example we draw on is Abbotsford Mission, which is located in the lower mainland of BC. And it's an example of where pricing has impacted conservation and where the municipal water purveyor has been looking at water conservation initiatives to reduce demand. Some of these conservation-oriented actions include the issuance of bi-monthly water bills, installation of smart meters that provide hourly consumption data, landscape and irrigation audits, lawn sprinkling restrictions, and rebates for water-saving toilets, wash machines, and fixtures, and as well as a short-lived tiered pricing regime. The result, according to the Abbotsford Mission Water and Sewer Commission, is that per capita water use has decreased in both average and peak days in the last 2 years. Now, we've also seen signs in other jurisdictions, such as the Southwest United States, where there's even more water and even more energy stress, that when municipalities get serious, they can actually see very positive results in water and energy reductions and the associated savings. So one example that we looked at was the case of Las Vegas, and people may not necessarily equate Las Vegas with reductions in water use and everything. But we've seen that despite its population increase of more than 500,000 people between 2000 and 2009, and this is an increase of 36%, total water consumption increased by just 1.4%. So we believe that if municipalities are if they don't get serious, we really face the potential for significant challenges down the road for available water supply and associated energy needs. Now we have the bad. So on the other side of the coin, we see potential for an unsustainable increase in water and energy use in the shale gas industry in British Columbia. Now this comes with an undeniable risk that we may end up with compromised water quality and quantity and compromised energy security for the province. A potential energy source to power the shale gas industry comes from thermal power plants whose turbines are fired by natural gas. Thermal power relies on heating water to produce steam to spin these turbines. If fossil fuels are burned to power 3 proposed liquid natural gas facilities in Kitimat, the emissions associated with this would be enough to increase BC's emissions by more than 9% with the associated climate change implications.
Thanks, Jesse. And now we turn to the ugly, the very critical issue of climate change. We know that climate change will increase both the incidence and severity of extreme events, and we're starting to see that in British Columbia. Perhaps the best example of this is the massive pine beetle outbreak, which has resulted in most of the pine trees across an area the size of England in the interior of the province being killed. There continues to be changes to the hydrology of many forested areas as a result of that infestation, including drier and hotter conditions in some forests and much wetter boggier conditions in others. We are also seeing disturbing signs of severe drought in some parts of the province. In 2010 and again in 2012, parts of the Peace region in northeast BC were hit by significant, prolonged stretches of hot, dry weather that resulted in halts to water withdrawals from some surface water bodies and declines in hydroelectric production. A number of large, intense forest fires have also occurred in recent years and are widely expected to increase in number, with some forest scientists predicting that BC's average forest fire season could increase by nearly 2 months. The impacts on communities and the WaterEnergy Nexus are also now being felt. The community of Lillooet, for example, now faces a $10.5 million cost to relocate its community water supply, following devastating fires that heavily damaged the community's existing water supplies. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how these impacts of climate change may exacerbate problems that are starting to become evident insofar as our hydroelectric resources are concerned. You may recall off the top, we talked briefly about the current strains on the provincial power supply. To elaborate further, Statistics Canada data on electricity production from all sources in the province reveals that in 6 of the past 11 years and 5 of the past 10, that BC has been in an energy trade deficit. This does not mean conclusively that BC was not self-sufficient in its own power production, because the picture is clouded by the fact that the province operates within an integrated system where power is bought and sold between jurisdictions. However, it does suggest that we are beginning to bump up against limits. For the first 20 of the past 30 years, we were only in a trade deficit, energy trade deficit once. Climate change is likely to increase the timing, the intensity, and the variability of water flows into hydroelectric reservoirs. This presents challenges, as does the incremental drawdown of water from such reservoirs for non-hydro production purposes. For example, municipalities drawing down water, or industries like the fracking industry drawing down water.
So the fundamental challenge that we've identified in the report is one of governance reform. And as Ben has just shown, we face big challenges in our domestic energy security in the province. And what we're seeing is not necessarily a lot of understanding by the province that in order to achieve better management, we need a coordinated approach. This means we need to look at refining our approaches to governing these resources. And this, again, is a fundamental challenge that we've identified. However, the government is aware that the status quo no longer works, but unfortunately its policies are not coordinated. This creates a risk that unless we achieve greater coordination, there's probably going to be problems. The reorganization and institutional change are needed to achieve coherence in overall provincial policies and to ensure improved governance both within sectors but also across or between sectors.
Thanks, Jesse. As Jesse just mentioned, the overarching challenge we face is to reform our governance structures so that they can more effectively respond to the multiple challenges confronting us with the WaterEnergy Nexus. There are currently a number of different policies or objectives being pursued by the provincial government that are not only not coordinated, but that could undermine each other. We need to ensure that there is coherence across all policies and objectives if improved governance of water and energy resources is to result. It may well be that with legislation to revise our Provincial Water Act not yet in place, and with a provincial election now just 7 months away, that we may not see any amendments or changes to the Act introduced for quite some time, perhaps even until 2014. So the good news is that we have time to influence the shape and form of that legislation. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant of other policy objectives, including the province's Clean Energy Act, which establishes limits on greenhouse gas emissions, and a provincial economic plan and related employment strategy that calls for huge increases in natural gas industry and mining industry activities that obviously present clear challenges to the sustainable management of water and water-derived energy resources, and that would further increase the depths of those challenges by seeing BC's greenhouse gas emissions climb rather than fall.
So as I've mentioned before, that in our research, improvement in governance is a key element to the coordinated and the effective management of our interconnected energy and water resources. We've identified 4 actions that if we embrace immediately can set the stage for more effective governance in the years ahead.
The first of those action items is to publish accurate, timely reporting on all water use. British Columbia does not report out on water use at this point in time, yet it has a long history of timely disclosure of data in its natural resource sectors. A prime example of this is that for the past 15 years, the province has published very detailed information on an online database about all the trees that are logged in the province. More recently, as a result of reforms to groundfish fisheries on BC's coast, data on actual catch volumes by number of fish and species has become a prerequisite. We need to replicate that kind of data collection for our water resources. Presently, many water licenses do not even require the holders of those licenses to meter their water withdrawals or to report the water they use. There are some encouraging signs that some regulatory bodies in the province grasp the importance of water collection data. The Provincial Oil and Gas Commission, for example, in response to legitimate public concerns about the potential for a radical increase in water takings by the natural gas industry, has begun to require that gas companies report the water they withdraw from streams, rivers, and lakes, and from man-made structures, including burrow pits. This is a tentative step in the right direction, although it fails to come close to categorizing all water used by the industry. Our research showed that in other sectors, there is virtually no data collection on water usage whatsoever. As noted here, of 31 water licenses in the province held by pulp mills, only 1 license required the user to meter their water diversions, and even then, there was not a requirement that such usage be automatically reported. We believe that the province could quickly move to a comprehensive water use reporting program that would require major water users to meter all water consumption and to report actual water usage.
Action number 2, appropriately price water and energy resources. So we've identified pricing as an important and necessary tool to ensure that water resources are conserved to their full extent. There's strong evidence that pricing can play an important role in driving conservation and innovation, yet a central challenge is to ensure that principles of equity apply if and when higher pricing of water and energy resources are implemented. So at the household level, for example, water pricing must be designed in a manner that ensures that lower income households are not adversely impacted, and tiered pricing offers some promise in achieving this. The case study we use in the report is from the Okanagan region, which has recorded noteworthy successes in reducing water consumption as a result of new tiered water pricing structures. Our case study on the Southeast Kelowna Irrigation District illustrates this reduction. In the district, irrigators account for about 85% of all water used, yet constitute only 17% of water connections under the district's control. In 1994, in response to a series of droughts, the district installed water meters and provided local orchard owners with meters to monitor soil moisture, giving irrigators valuable data that could help them to reduce overwatering their crops. And in 2000, a flat water rate for basic water allotments was introduced, with a volumetric rate set for water use beyond the basic amount. So as a result of these pricing changes, the number of large water abusers has dropped to 0 as of 2004.
Action number 3 is to promote resource recovery to conserve water and energy resources. And this really is a kind of natural action item that flows out of the first 2 action items that we endorse. The National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy in reviewing the country's natural resource industries in a report last year, concluded that water pricing was one tool that would encourage further industry innovation and conservation, and that a prerequisite for proper pricing is knowing how much water is being used by whom and where. So if we look at a good example of resource recovery in the province, we might want to consider the example of the Southeast False Creek community in Vancouver. The beauty of resource recovery is that it lessens demands elsewhere in the system. If water or energy can be reused or put to further use rather than being wasted, there is less need to rely on existing or new water and energy resources. In the case of the Southeast False Creek neighborhood, resource recovery comes in the form of heat captured from the sewage stream. Heat from the sewage stream, which passes underneath the community en route to a distant treatment facility, is siphoned off and directed around to the development's various buildings, where with the assistance of heat pumps and other technology, it serves to heat the homes and the water supplies of what will eventually be 16,000 residents. Other examples of resource recovery include the pulp and paper sector, which has made significant gains in the reuse and recirculation of water, which assists both in the pulping process and in energy production at such facilities. And resource recovery is also likely to be a feature of a new wastewater sewage treatment facility in the Greater Victoria area.
So on the home stretch here, we have Action 4, prioritize watershed health and function. So as the report lays out, major industrial water and power users threaten to tax our water and energy resources, industries that may overuse and contaminate water, so much so that it must be effectively removed from the hydrological cycle forever. And this is often the case for water used in the fracking industry. Given the linkages between water availability and power production, unchecked development in watersheds can have serious consequences for both water and energy resources. And such consequences are only increased as the impacts of climate change increasingly are felt in watersheds across the province. Adequately protecting watershed lands so that they are resilient in the face of anticipated changes to our climate will be vital to conserve water and energy resources. In prioritizing watershed health and function as a key strategy in conserving water and energy resources, the provincial government should consider the benefits that have accrued to those regions of the province where watershed protection was made a public policy priority. And this really gets to the point that a vibrant economy depends critically on a healthy environment. Some communities in BC are retaining strong influence over their drinking watershed lands. The Greater Vancouver Regional District's 3 major watersheds are held under a 999-year lease. In the city of Victoria, there's similarly strong powers over the majority of land surrounding its drinking water reservoirs, primarily because they own the lands outright. A key strategy to its source water protection plan, the Capital Regional District purchased 8,791 hectares of land in the Leech River watershed for $58.9 million. To protect future drinking water supply lands. Importantly, the purchase of this land could allow the CRD to avoid almost $150 million worth of investment into new water treatment facilities.
Thanks, Jesse. So to recap, this work will soon be released as a report co-published by POLIS and the CCPA. We will be highlighting many of the report's findings through a communications effort that will be designed to showcase both the challenges facing the water-energy nexus in the province, as well as the opportunities identified in our numerous case studies. We continue to be engaged with numerous players in government and outside government and intend to amplify on some of our key action items by publishing smaller reports. For example, a short report on what a proper water reporting regime for BC would look like is now in draft form. In the longer term, we will be seeking to complete research that looks at more specific governance reforms.
So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Steve Wiseman. So Steve, if you haven't unmuted your line, just press *6 and we'll be able to hear you. So with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Steve.
Great. How do you like that? Technology at its best. Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, Jesse and Ben, for a very, very interesting presentation and a really well-crafted, very thoughtful report. I think this is a great way to advance the conversation on this particular topic in BC and beyond. And Laura, I also want to thank you for your help in getting all this together. First, a little background in terms of how I came to this issue. I worked at the California Public Utilities Commission, which regulates both the energy utilities and the privately owned water utilities in California. I worked there in many capacities, but I spent a lot of years as an administrative law judge. And one of the proceedings that I handled late on in that process before I left in 2008 was a case that was addressing the implications of the energy-water nexus in one specific area that I'll describe in a minute. You know, it's very interesting when I can't remember the day when I first heard of the concept of the energy-water nexus, but I certainly can remember the feeling, because as a confessed policy wonk, the notion of taking these two concepts, which have such important policies and implications independently, and thinking them together is just a fresh and exciting way to think about policy issues. But the first thing we had to really consider was what is the implication of this nexus? I mean, there are lots of nexuses that you could identify between particular kinds of industrial uses and water quality or air quality, or relationships between housing and transportation. But what is especially interesting and appealing, of course, about the energy-water nexus is the interactive nature of it. The fact that when you reduce water use, you reduce energy use, which in turn reduces water use, and it's like a mirror within a mirror. And so we had to spend time just trying to figure out what that meant in the context of what we do in California and the U.S. in terms of energy use and water use. What Ben and Jesse described in BC, of course, is very heavily informed by a very heavy emphasis on hydroelectric power. California, of course, has a lot of hydropower as well, but the implications of the connection between energy and water are also very, very heavily influenced by the extent to which we use thermal power sources. And the implications of having less water available as the climate continually fine-tunes itself. With less water, of course, there, as Ben and Jesse were emphasizing, you have less hydroelectric power, but you also have less fossil-fired power because of the significance in using water as a steam source, but also as a cooling source for thermal facilities that use fossil fuels. Same is actually true with nuclear power. Same is true with heat-dependent solar sources. So if the large facilities are being built in the desert to capture the sun's heat and use that to boil water, water both for steam and cooling are extremely important. And as we start moving toward an effort to try to mitigate the carbon impacts of these fossil plants that we use, when people talk about carbon capture and sequestration as a potential solution, CCS is also very water intensive, and as water resources become more precious, it becomes much more difficult to move in that direction as well. How does this inform, if at all, the kind of inquiry that you're undertaking in BC? Well, I think as Ben and Jesse pointed out, as the hydro resources get stretched further and further with the introduction in BC of hydrofracking using both water and energy, and of course with the very energy and water intensive uses elsewhere, such as in Alberta for the tar sands projects, it's going to be much more interesting to talk not about how the hydro resources get used, but where are you going to turn beyond the hydro resources in terms of having those marginal power sources that are going to get you through the increased demand as the water resources tend to diminish. So with this in mind, what was our inquiry in California? It was a very kind of special niche in the energy water world, I would think. had to do with the fact that the energy utilities, especially in California, are devoting tremendous amount of resources to promote energy efficiency. And the rationale, of course, is that if you can avoid additional consumption, and you can do it in a way that's cost-effective, all ratepayers benefit. So it's much better to spend money on reducing overall demand as long as you do it in a cost-effective way than it is to find that next incremental source of power to meet the demand. Well, those programs are well underway in California, but with the realization of the significant effects from the WaterEnergy Nexus, the question became, to what extent might it make sense to take those energy efficiency dollars and start spending those dollars on water conservation? I mean, after all, water has a lot of energy embedded in it. There's a story to tell that relates to all of the energy that has to go into pumping or processing water, and if you can save water, you are going to be able to save energy. And so, to the extent to which it might be cost effective, you might want to start taking some of those energy dollars and spend them on water conservation. Well, that really raised, I think, a number of questions that I think might be relevant in the context of the report that you're reviewing today. When you start looking at ways to conserve energy related to water, then you start asking questions, various kinds of questions, but probably the most important one, is how much energy do you really need to use in order to process the water? And the largest source of energy demand usually is related to moving that water around, the pumping process itself. There are ways to create strategies for moving water that might be less energy intensive, certainly less peak energy intensive, by finding ways to move water at night instead of during the day when places like California tend to have the highest level of demand. But if you can find ways to also improve the efficiency of the pumps themselves, taking some of the fixed speed pumps and replacing them with variable speed motors that can respond to different conditions and only use the energy that's necessary to pump at any particular time, then you can actually reduce the amount of energy that's embedded in that water and reduce the implications of water use in terms of energy consumption. And then there's this whole set of other things. Cold water, of course, deals with the water that's being delivered. Hot water, of course, is the way water is used, and so in both instances there are ways to reduce water and have a significant impact on energy consumption. But what becomes really critical when you're trying to look at those strategies is to not only understand the direct savings when, for instance, you change something about water use for a particular purpose, but also to look at these issues on a life cycle basis. This is, I was asked to put a picture in of myself. Well, this is not me, this is my dog Uma, and standing in front of our minivan, which has served us very well, and it's been a constant source of embarrassment for me because, I mean, the minivan on its good days doesn't get more than maybe 19 or 20 miles per gallon. So I'd love to change out the minivan, maybe get a hybrid or get a purely electric vehicle. But the question that's really hard for consumers to answer is, what's the net savings going to be from that? It's going to take a lot of energy in order to produce another vehicle. And so the question is, what is the energy payback going to be over time? I think that you want to have answers to questions like that before you start making a move in the name of water conservation or energy efficiency. So what do we run up against in that regard when we were looking at our energy efficiency dollars being spent for water conservation? Well, here's one simple example. It has to do with the toilet. Because if you're going to make a cold water change, one of the simplest things you can do is take an old toilet that you may use many gallons of water per flush and replace it with a highly efficient toilet that's going to only need a smaller amount of water. Well, this is all, again, if it's in the name of not only saving water, but saving energy. Do you know how much energy you're actually saving? In order to answer that question, you want to look at the life cycle effect of taking a perfectly good toilet and replacing it with another perfectly good toilet. And in order to do that, you might want to look and see what it takes to make a toilet. I worked with a wonderful, bright young engineer who developed this for me, this process chart. This doesn't measure energy quantities, but it looks at the processes they have to go through in order to manufacture a toilet. And I'm emphasizing here with this green arrow just one part of that function. We have to take the porcelain bowl and fire it at 2250, as high as 2200 degrees Fahrenheit in a kiln for 40 hours. Now you're not going to have one bowl alone, so the energy impacts would be spread among many. But the question is, what do these energy-intensive uses of functions and processes imply for the overall benefit of changing out one appliance for another? And these are questions that tend to require moving beyond even the broad public policy concepts, such as the interrelationship between energy and water, and start digging beneath the surface to see what's really going on. And so I guess that's one issue I just wanted to bring up, was the importance of considering all of these potential strategies in a life cycle context. Another concept that I wanted to offer is the necessity of trying to have some level of accuracy in the way one's measuring these energy-water effects. I do want to note that that one of the challenges when you start talking simultaneously in the energy and water worlds is that the two things, at least from what I've observed in the United States, tend to come from entirely different cultures. You have different types of organizations delivering water usually, and from those delivering energy. And where they're the same organization, they're usually different departments with people looking at things through different colored glasses. So that when you start looking at the energy-water nexus, it's a natural thing to look either more from an energy perspective or more from a water perspective. And I'd like to observe that the report that Jesse and Ben have prepared certainly acknowledges and refers to a number of energy-related issues, but largely in terms of action items is really focused on things to do on the water side. And so since I started out looking from these issues from the energy side, I start looking at different kinds of solutions potentially. But one of the questions is, how can you measure the effect of what you're doing? For instance, if you decided it's an important energy-related goal to reduce water consumption, well, where do you want to go to find that water that you're going to conserve that's going to have the most impact in terms of reducing energy consumption? The answer to that question depends very much on whose water you're saving and when you're saving it. Because it turns out that every water delivery agency tends to have a different story to tell. Is it relying on pumping groundwater? Is it dealing only with surface water? If so, how far is it moving the surface water? Does it have altitude to have to deal with, so that it has to pump water at a higher energy value over higher altitudes? What are the processing requirements for water in a particular district? So if you're going to try to be as effective as you can in targeting places to reduce water in the name of reducing energy consumption, you probably need to know things beyond a generalized level. You could come up with an average savings. If you save a gallon of water, you're going to save a certain amount of energy. But you may not be actually producing those results unless you target the money, target the activities in the place that's going to give you the most effective results. Looking at that in California, it becomes really easy to see the challenge when you deal with the fact that you have rivers in the north part of the state that are delivering water into a delta beyond the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, and then letting that water go into a series of aqueducts that move up and down the state, get down toward Los Angeles and have to go over the Tehachapi's, the mountains, and then go back down into the to the LA area and then down to San Diego. Saving water on that system has different implications depending on where you are in the state, but it also has different implications depending on whether you really, what's going to happen with that extra water. If you save water in one location, does that mean it won't be used, or will it just be used somewhere else? In California, the water system is entirely oversubscribed, so savings in one place doesn't necessarily result in less water being used on that project. Well, the project also generates electricity at various places along the line. And in looking at the potential for saving energy, the operators of that project have to look at the implications in terms of energy in and energy out. If you have less water going to Los Angeles, you're going to produce less hydroelectric power on the way down to LA from the top of the mountains. And so these issues all have to be taken into account. And so distinguishing one source of water from another, one kind of energy use from another, becomes extremely important. So in that light, I wanted to suggest just a couple other things quickly. One is potentially, perhaps you might want to look in your further work, Ben and Jesse, into the concept of thinking of storage as a comprehensive framework. You can store water, and that provides several advantages and opportunities. One example, for instance, is if you are able to move water into a particular area at night and store it in reservoirs and tanks at higher altitude, then during the day, if you get to the peak usage periods for energy, you might be able to move that water just on a gravity-fed system and be able to avoid peak energy use, which means maybe you're not turning from those hydro plants to that peak source that might use some sort of fossil fuel. So that kind of strategy for storage, I think, is very important. The report talks about desal as a potential large energy users, desalinization of water, and this is certainly a huge problem. Desal has lots of implications, one of which is that, of course, it could potentially have a growth-inducing impact. If you have access to more water because you're able to take salt out of ocean water, then maybe you can sustain more growth in an area, which can have both energy implications and long-term water implications. But also down the road, it might be possible to use a desal plant in a way that, in effect, provides a form of energy storage. Let's suppose you've got a desal plant, which of course is going to be located on the ocean, and then you're able to site offshore wind facilities offshore near those desal plants. Well, one of the challenges with wind is that it's intermittent, and so you can't always rely on it as a grid-fed energy source in a way that's going to be dependable. Well, what if instead you could use the output of those wind turbines to operate a desal plant, and in effect store the work done by that energy in the form of desalinated water? Then they have that water in a place that might be closer to the population center, so it might require less pumping. Overall, it could potentially lead to a situation where you've got overall energy savings because of the way you've managed that system. It's another way of looking, I think, at the nexus between energy and water. And then finally, in California, we've certainly seen a situation where the reservoirs along that California aqueduct system can be used as pump storage facilities. You can take water from some of the lower altitude reservoirs, pump it up at night back up to the higher altitude reservoirs, and then use it to run the hydro turbines during peak periods. And so this is another strategy that recognizes the link between the two. I've probably talked beyond my limits, but I wanted to quickly highlight just a few things in terms of reactions to the particular action items that are set forth in the report. One additional suggestion in terms of things you might want to consider in the next phase of this work is to consider acknowledging the fact that the efficiency of the pumps itself is a very significant factor in terms of the energy implied in water use, and so that making it the highest priority to understand the nature of the pumps that are being used throughout the water systems, and improving the efficiency of those pumps wherever possible by replacing them if necessary, might be a really good high priority item to consider. The second, you've talked very well about measuring water use, and I think that's extremely important. We're certainly seeing that in California as well, where there's more installation of both flat meters and real-time meters occurring in parts of the water system that tended to be unmetered before. Very significant in terms of getting people to think about the way they use water and being able to differentially price water in order to encourage conservation. But beyond that, I think it's also very important to measure and understand the energy intensity of the water that's being used, that embedded energy in the water that, as I suggested, might differ very much geographically and different from one system, water system to another. A third would be to consider requiring that whenever there's a new project being approved that could have implications related to water use or energy use, that there be an energy water assessment that will be required as part of that process. It's something that in the States it's pretty easy to imagine inserting into the environmental review that would otherwise would occur under the National Environmental Policy Act, or in California under the California Environmental Quality Act, where you have to do a full environmental assessment before approving a new activity. This is something that perhaps could be rhythmically a part of the assessment of any new project. Fourth, identify the peak water source that's used in any particular location. Because again, the implications of water conservation in terms of energy savings is going to depend not only on the strategy and the function of a particular water district, but in fact, which is the marginal source. The report talked about one example of an entity that uses 3 different water sources. Well, which one is on the margin? So in other words, which one will be saved most directly if you can actually reduce water consumption? That understanding that can help you understand the energy implications a lot better. And then finally, as I've mentioned, maybe consider the life cycle effects when exploring water and energy conservation strategies. So that's a lot to throw at you quickly, and I look forward to the discussion. But again, I'm really find it very exciting to see the effort you're undertaking, and the report just looks terrific. Is anybody still there?
Yeah, we're still here. Laura, are you on the line? I think you might still be muted because we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now, Jesse?
We can hear you now.
Okay, fantastic. So thanks very much, Jesse, Ben, and Steve. And at this point, we're going to move into the question period. So we have all 3 of our panelists now on the line, and I would invite all of you to please use that chat box in the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll get this discussion rolling. To start us off, we had a couple points come up during Steve's presentation. From Rod DeBell here at the Center for Global Studies. He says, a crucial point, efficiency calculation is misleading for individual sectors, just as it is without a life cycle analysis. What we must have is full integrated ecological cycle analysis. So we need ECA as well as LCA. And in response to that, Darwin Horning says, excellent point. The savings in water consumed in the Kelowna case study should have led to a built-in level of resilience with extra capacity, but instead led to an investigation of expanding irrigated lands, negating any resiliency capacity. So to the 3 panelists, I don't know if you have anything to add to this conversation that has started.
Well, this is Steve. I guess I'll start out. I couldn't agree more with both of the commenters. I think that one of the intriguing characteristics about managing water as a resource, I think, is that it's not only it's very resilient in terms of its uses, and that as water is saved in one place, it may very well likely be consumed somewhere else, and so understanding the full range of implications from taking an action related to water conservation is very important if you want to know whether you're putting your efforts in the right place, but it's also a challenge for that reason. Part of what I think causes people to throw their hands up, both with life cycle analysis and with any other kind of broader assessment, is where do you stop? You could just spend all your time infinitely looking at each next layer of impact. And well, obviously, as you go further down the chain, the chain of effects, the overall effect on the outcome is going to be much smaller. But certainly, having a logical exercise where you think through the second and third level effects, I think is going to be really important in order to to adopt the right strategy.
Great.
Steve, it's Ben here. I just wanted to first say thank you so much for your presentation, and I was intrigued by one of the issues you raised, which was the question of desalination plants and the moving of energy about. Certainly in some of the reading that Jesse and I did for this report, we encountered a great deal of concern about the energy requirements at desalination plants or proposed plants. And what you seem to be suggesting is that you shouldn't categorically rule out certain options, even if they appear at first take to be of questionable merit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to say that personally, I'm very concerned about the overall movement for desal. I think it's yes, it's extremely energy intensive, and also, as I mentioned briefly, I think it could have growth-inducing impacts. If you start manufacturing, in effect, water, then the argument could be made, well, make more water, and then we could have more development in this area. I think about some place, like a place down here, like the Monterey Peninsula, where Monterey and Carmel are, absolutely beautiful, wonderful communities that have been very much growth restricted because of the limits of potable water in the area. Now they're talking about a desal plant there, and that could change the conversation entirely. And I guess what I have been thinking a little further about, partially a benefit, by the way, of a conference that I attended at University of Calgary. I noticed there was at least one person from Calgary on this call. That it might want to at least think about the potential for having a win-win. Now the trap, of course, is that once you create something like a desal plant, then it changes the economics of several things. I mean, you talked about resource recovery, for instance, but you talked about it largely in terms of trying to capture energy off of wastewater, which I think is a very, very important thing. We're seeing a lot of that happening certainly down here right now. But people talk about resource recovery. It also includes often discussion of burning trash, for instance, and if to divert it from landfill. Well, that's great. You divert it from landfill, but you also, the burnable parts of the trash tend to be things that are largely reusable or recyclable, and so you create a different revenue, a different economic stream. So if you have this large source of energy demand in the form of a desal plant close to a population center that's producing a lot of trash, for instance, then people might start talking about ways to marry the two things up. So it's a slippery slope when you start talking about desal, but I guess it might pay for us to think a little further, though, about whether there's a way to get a favorable result by marrying up renewables to desal.
Great, thank you. So the next point that's come in is from David Hill, who says, interesting presentations and perspectives to all of you. And I think we may need to broaden our thinking about this topic. It's forecast that with population growth, we may need to increase energy production while doubling food production, all from existing, more variable water supplies and the specter and reality of climate change. So perhaps we should be having the conversation around the water, energy, food, health nexus, considering both the environmental and human. While it might seem to make the problem more complex, it points to looking for solutions in a system-wide and integrated approach. So Ben, Jesse, Steve, any comments for David?
Well, I would jump in by saying that I think expanding the view out to consider the broader issues of food production is of essential importance. Certainly one of the things that Jesse and I focused on was in this report is the potential for potentially significant increases in power production in the province from hydroelectric sources. And of course, one of those sources that is being considered is the proposed location of a third dam on the Peace River system, the Site C Dam, The net effect of doing that, of putting that reservoir in, would be to take a lot of agricultural land out of production in the province, which of course would necessitate higher energy inputs to move more food about. So we have to consider very carefully the ripple effect, as it were, of these things, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have focused so much attention on the publishing of water information and pricing, because we believe strongly that conservation initiatives need to be embarked on seriously to reduce the potentiality for having to put in this extra energy infrastructure. One of the things, too, that I should just quickly add is, in the example that Jesse gave of the Abbotsford Mission area, we perhaps should have highlighted the energy savings that would have occurred as a result of efforts underway there. This is a municipality that is projected to experience significant population growth in the next little while, to the point where the water purveyor is looking at potentially having to access a new water supply. The water supply that they would access is higher ground. It involves a hydroelectric reservoir. So in order to expand the existing water delivery system, the municipality would have to put in quite a significant amount of new water infrastructure. There would be heavy increases in water pumping costs to move that water about. If, however, the municipalities were to get very serious about conservation, we believe strongly that they wouldn't even have to build that infrastructure, and that there would be significant savings as a result.
Yes, this is Steve again. I guess just a quick amen to what to David Hill's comment. Of course, this may be implied in your question, but one of the ways all of this gets very complicated is if you start looking toward biofuels as a way to meet some of the energy needs, and then you've got of course the energy versus food trade-offs, that you also have another very water-intensive use in order to produce those biofuels. So I think the comment's well taken.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here also, just adding to David's comment. Liz Kermey says she completely agrees with you, David. We should definitely be looking not only at the WaterEnergy Nexus, but at WaterEnergy Food Nexus, and drawing on what you're saying a little bit, Steve, possibly combine this with greenhouse gas emissions as well. From Chris Wood, a question: to what extent might a combined water energy, food to follow, David, monitoring system incorporate existing data were it made free and aggregated? And to what extent would it require new investments in monitoring?
I think that there actually is, at least in the U.S., a fair amount of data that's collected from various kinds of monitors, and I think the first step is going to be a matter of making an intelligent assessment of the kinds of information that is available. There's constantly, of course, the question of what can you share in any kind of an analytical form without starting to trade away your commercial secrets, et cetera, and so there are always issues related to masking data and aggregating it so that it's not you can't pinpoint an individual user. That kind of conversation has not happened in an organized way, at least down here, and so I think that has to be the step one before you can decide what additional kinds of data you need to collect. There's a lot of information that exists. The question is how to get hold of it and manage it.
Ben and Jesse, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Well, it's Jesse here. I think one of the things we highlight in the report as well is the interconnected nature of a lot of these actions. So, for instance, adequately pricing water would then contribute to covering the cost of an expanded monitoring system. It would probably be a new investment in the province to be able to go out and get a lot of the baseline information and set up this monitoring system, but with the increase in costs being recovered from a new pricing regime, that could be a possible revenue source to cover an probably a quite expensive monitoring system for the province.
I would quickly jump in on what Jesse has said to highlight the fact that in many cases in the province, the large industrial water users are paying virtually nothing for the water that they're using, and this is highly problematic. It's something that the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy pointed to, and British Columbia's water rental rates are extremely low. So I think that there is definitely room room to move in terms of bringing those rates up, which of course would have the benefit of spurring industry innovation, but also providing funds to the province that would allow for not only increased monitoring, but better data dissemination.
Great, thank you, Ben. So next question here is again from Darwin. I would be interested in hearing about a WaterEnergy Nexus with a focus on alternative energy rather than our current energy focus on non-renewable energy. Any thoughts on that comment?
Jesse here, I agree. I think that would be an extremely interesting approach to take, and perhaps an avenue for further study here at POLIS and with the CCPA. I mean, right now, our report really is focused on I guess, renewables in BC in the sense that we're looking at hydro, and to a very small extent that the province relies on thermal power. But I agree with the comment that it would be a really interesting avenue to take.
Yeah, this is Steve. You know, part of the conversation that we're having down here, as we start seeing the development of large concentrated solar projects out in the desert, is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the thermal projects, the one that use heat, use a lot of water, and they're using it in a place where you don't have a lot of water. So it's immediately a challenge. Well, as the economics of photovoltaics have started to improve, you're starting to see some of these projects that initially were intended to be thermal being converted to photovoltaics, which with a much lower water need. You just basically need water to clean things and manage facilities, as opposed to actually depending on the water to make the energy. So so we're starting to see that. The trade-off, though, is that again, solar is intermittent. The ability to smooth out the curve on what you're being supplied is much greater if you're using a thermal facility, because you can store some of that heat and then use it later when the sun's not shining. That's something that's not easily done with a photovoltaic facility, so there are trade-offs there. But that's definitely a big part of the conversation now, the water energy conversation related to renewables. We've had a big movement in California to stop what's referred to as a once-through cooling approach that's used with a lot of the fossil plants, where you draw water out from river or the ocean. You use it to help cool down the plant, and then you cycle the water back, and you've raised the water temperature, the place where you took it out originally. So, and the water control agencies in the state have said we don't want that happening anymore. So now you're seeing time-sensitive movement away from these plants that use once-through cooling techniques. New plants are being developed that are dry cooling, but it's also creating much more demand for turning into renewables instead, if you can avoid that water use.
All right, the next question comes from Brad Densmore, and he's wondering, for industrial water licensing, are current environmental flow policies an adequate baseline? And I think Brad is specifically referring to in the province of British Columbia.
It's Ben here. I would say that it's a very good question, and it seems to be a bit of a moving target as far as proposed industrial activities, new industrial activities in the province are concerned. So, as an example, the fairly significant ramp-up that we've seen in gas industry activities, natural gas industry activities in the northeast of the province, is happening against a backdrop where we don't really have that flow data information adequately in place. So we definitely need, I think, to see much more attention being focused on viewing these applications in the wider context of watersheds and considering what the cumulative impacts of multiple withdrawals are going to be and the associated energy that is going to be required to get these activities up and running, because they will all have a bearing on the water flows at the landscape level.
Thanks, Ben. Steve or Jesse, anything to add there, or?
Not I.
Well, okay, so next comment here from David again. I would be interested in hearing from the panelists as well as the attendees about how we have this kind of conversation, and again he's referring to the water, energy, food, environment nexus, how we have this kind of conversation with the public, with government regulators, and with industry. It may seem too abstract for many, but it's crucial to creating any kind of improved sustainability. And as for biofuels from agricultural and other wastes, he says, okay, but at the end of the day, the planet will need food to eat.
Ben here, I might kick things off by saying that I think the way, a critical way that we begin to have the conversation or expand the conversation is to start to work as much as we can to open up the lines of communication between regions and municipalities and the provincial government. I mean, we said early on in our presentation that there was an acknowledgement, has been an acknowledgement by the provincial government that we need to consider different forms of governance. And I believe strongly that that's the case, and that municipalities and regional authorities have a very good understanding of this. So to give us a quick example, we mentioned the community of Lillooet and the problems that community is facing as a result of the devastation on surface water lands as a result of forest fires. One of the things that I think we need to do in this province is to look at devolving some of the power from the provincial government to municipal and regional authorities. So as an example, in British Columbia, we have an immense amount of Crown land that is under ultimately under the provincial government's authority. But we see approaches to managing those lands that focus in primarily on one resource to the exclusion of others. So a classic example in BC would be the historic focus that we've had in this province on timber production. Timber production really is not compatible in many cases with ensuring the provision of clean water to communities. So one thing that we ought to be doing, I think, is having a conversation about how we devolve some powers to local authorities and give them the power to have a much greater degree of control and be proactive on their watershed lands to ensure, for example, that we don't have things or that we reduce the risk of such things as catastrophic wildfires, which ultimately will save municipalities tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in water treatment costs and all of the embedded energy associated with that. So that's one area where I believe that we can start to have a conversation.
Thanks, Ben. And I'm gonna flip around a few of the comments coming in here, adding also to David's most recent comment. Jennifer Arthur says, David, that thought is not abstract at all. I was just going to type up a similar question about what the likelihood is of the reports being reviewed and adopted by government into policy. Here in Ontario, at least, it seems that there are so many reports done with really excellent suggestions, but it seems as though it goes unnoticed by government and never makes its way, or makes its way very slowly, into policy. And even then, it's not always comprehensive, so that the end point is skewed from what was intended in the original report. It's a challenge for sure. And she's asking, do the presenters have any thoughts on how we can change the government process and get more recognition for research and create policy more quickly and comprehensively?
Well, this is Steve. This might have been pointed specifically at folks that are working within the provinces, but I've got this, a thought to offer, which is that what we're finding with the projects that we're undertaking in our Environmental and Energy Law Center is that the one of the keys is to try to always build in a process that takes a report beyond the shelf that it might sit on, and actually leads to engaging with people on the subject. I think this particular webinar is an example of that, right? Where you actually say, all right, well, these are the ideas we're thinking of, and now we're going to pull together some of the thought leaders and see what they have to say about it. That's a start. But well, for instance, we'll have workshops. If it's something that may be best implemented on the local government level, for instance, we may have focused workshops with local elected officials or with the appropriate kinds of agency managers within the governments, and present the findings and talk about what the implications are for them. We'll have heavily facilitated meetings with thought leaders. We say, all right, what are the barriers to moving in this direction? How can we clear those barriers? And we'll do further writing that talks about the strategies for doing that. And we're involved with the process where we've been working directly with Governor Brown down here in California, who had a campaign goal to get 12,000 megawatts of installed distributed renewable energy projects throughout the state by the year 2020. We helped the governor put on a conference July before last that had about 270 people at it that was designed not only to lay out some of the challenges of getting there, but actually mine the best ideas from the attendees. And we had elected officials there and regulators, and we kind of try to move the conversation to a different level as part of our initiative, as opposed to just hoping someone's going to pick it up and run with it. And I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that, there's no great substitute for having strong leadership. If you have somebody at the top, one person you can talk to who can make a difference, then that's the way to go. But the reality is that these things probably have to continue to be pushed on all levels in order to keep the conversation alive.
Thanks, Steve. Jesse jumping in here. I think that's an excellent question, and just as an example of how we might be doing this in BC already, and Steve mentioned some of those ways as well in California, is through, for instance, POLIS has been involved in the Water Act modernization process now for a number of years, and we've hosted numerous workshops where we've invited policy makers from the government, people from the community, NGOs, and kind of a whole wide spectrum of people to engage in these conversations, and it really has been directed at pushing policy forward. And as well, the entire Water Act modernization process has been one that has heavily involved the input of communities and people kind of outside of government to have an input in crafting what a new legislation might look like. An example of this is the introduction of groundwater legislation there in monitoring and licensing groundwater. That's now going to be part of a modernized Water Act. So just an example of how input from the community and how through really targeting policymakers in discussion with those across the province has had positive impact on how to really formulate and steer effective policymaking.
Great, thanks, Jesse. And again, I'm just going to flip around some of the comments here, wrapping up this conversation started by David on the water, energy, food, environment nexus. Something coming from Liz Kermey saying that this is exactly what they're doing in Cambridge, which is visualizing in an easy way the trade-offs between water, energy, and land nexus in order for policymakers to understand that, for example, a water policy could affect energy and land resources and vice versa. So that might be a useful on-the-ground case study for anyone on the line who is interested in this sort of multiple overlay nexi. And the last question here from Rod was picking up on Steve's reference to IP constraints on sharing of / access to water data. How about a move to insist that corporate privileges with respect to data secrecy do not extend to use of common resources, which are a common heritage of humankind?
This is Steve. I think it's a really interesting idea. I haven't heard anybody present it quite like that before. I think it's really very intriguing.
Yeah, likewise, Jesse here. I think that would be a very good avenue to faster road to go down.
Great. All right, well, we've got about 10 minutes left on our official time, but it looks like the discussion box has been slowing down. Jesse and Ben, there is a comment here from Chris Wood that he'd like to get in touch with us to discuss this a little bit further, so I'll just put that out there to you guys now. So at this point, if anybody has any burning questions that they absolutely have to ask, please type them in. Otherwise, we will plan to finish up in the next little while. And before everybody leaves the line, I want to say thank you to everybody who called in today. And I'll let you know that our next webinar, we don't have the date finalized. We're still working with our guest speakers, but it will likely be taking place at the end of November. Michelle Lee Moore, who's a geography professor here at the University of Victoria, she works on watershed governance, transboundary issues, as well as social innovation, will be joining us. So that's going to be the topic of choice. And for those of you who are interested, all of our previous webinars from our last 2 seasons are available on our YouTube channel online, so I'd encourage you to check that out. This webinar has also been recorded, and I'll let all of you know when it's available. And we'll also circulate a 2-page summary with some links to additional reading and resources for those of you who have a particular interest in this topic. So, one last question here that has come in from Rod, panelists, if you have any thoughts. How promising might be web-based platforms like this for broader public consultation, as mentioned above?
Well, I'll jump in here. I think it would be a really effective way of engaging a large amount of people at a very kind of low cost and easy way of doing it. I mean, if we're able to sit at our homes and at our offices with our laptops, and we don't have to meet in physical, in a town hall meeting, as important as those still are, I think this is a really effective way of hitting a large amount of people at minimal effort.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen the success of it, Rod, bringing together in this virtual environment people from oftentimes every province and nearly every territory. I mean, that just wouldn't happen in real life with travel costs and practicalities. And as well, bringing together people, as you can see from our introductions at the beginning, people from a diversity of sectors, which also might not always happen if it was, a conference that you had to fly to and pay to attend. So yeah, definitely, I think it really opens the doors for just more engagement than you might get in another platform. Jennifer Arthur as well, Rod, responding to you, she says, definitely promising. In Ontario, there's been a number of similar presentations by NGOs on water topics. So on that positive note, I think we're going to wrap it up for the day. Once again, thank you all for tuning in today. I'll be in touch when the summary and video are available, and I'll certainly be in touch when we have the date nailed down for our next webinar. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you.
Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Bye.